In this lesson, we'll learn how Modo deals with objects and geometry. So let's do a quick refresher on how this actually works in Cinema 4D. So if we wanted to create a primitive object, we would go up to our command group at the top. We would find the icon for the type of object that we want to create and click on that. It would drop into our 3D view, and then we could change the values in the attribute manager. So we could change the size, we could change the number of divisions and things like that. Then when we wanted to work with that as a polygon object, we would make it editable. Okay, so we put it in an editable form, C key, or we would hit the little button up here on the upper left. So that's in Cinema 4D. In Modo, it's going to work a little bit differently. So let's look over here in the item list. You can see we have this mesh item right here, and the label for this is kind of grayed out. It has a little blue cube icon, much like the cube icon that we have in Cinema 4D for the cube primitive. But the label's grayed out, and this lets us know that there are no polygons right now inside of this mesh item. So we can think of this as sort of like a container that is going to hold our polygon objects. Now right now there's nothing inside of it. So thinking about that, when we create our objects, any kind of method that we're using to create polygons, we want to make sure that we have the correct mesh item selected. That's where those polygons are going to be placed. So with this selected, let's come over here to the left-hand side. Under basic, and you can see the icons for the different kinds of objects that we can create. Let's just bring in a cube. So if we just click on the cube icon straight away with no modifier keys, it's going to bring up the cube properties over here, and nothing comes in right here. So this is kind of it isn't into our scene yet, so we need to actually draw it onto our grid. So let's just draw out the base of the cube, and then we'll just grab the middle and pull it up. And you can see we're changing values here, not only position, but also size and segments. So we can come in here and interactively modify the number of segments. We can change the size. We can also use the handles in here, just like in Cinema 4D. So you can think of this as sort of like the attributes manager. Although this isn't persistent. Once we're done, once we get it to the point where we want it to be, and if we want it to be, let's say we want it to be right in the middle of our scene, we can go in here and we can change our position values and make sure that it's right in the middle of our grid. So we can change all those values. We're going to hit the space bar, and that's going to drop us out of that. So now we've basically made this editable. If we're talking in Cinema 4D terms, we're not going to have any of those options to change the divisions or the size using those parametric attributes anymore. So right now this is a polygon object. You can see that the mesh is not grayed out any longer. If you wanted to, you could come in, right click on this, and you could rename this mesh item. You could call this cube, call it whatever you want. We're in item mode, so we can come in and move this around. If we take a look in our properties, I'm just going to hit the W key to activate move. And you can see when we move, those values are being updated in our transform. So kind of like the coordinates manager. We're able to see those position values, the rotation values, and if we were to scale it, we'd be able to see the scale values as well. Okay, and so that's in item mode. Now, the thing that's kind of tricky is you can have multiple objects inside of each item. Okay, and if you have that item selected and you go about, you keep creating polygons, just keep in mind those are going to be added to that same mesh item. So if we were to come in now and create another one, let's create a sphere, but this time let's hold down Control, and we're going to create a unit sphere. So that's going to actually just pop it into our scene, and you can see it down below our cube. So now if we go back and move, you can see that we're moving not only the cube but also the sphere. Both of these objects, they're not connected, but they both exist inside of this what we've called cube mesh item. Okay, and you can see those values update here in our transforms. So that's nice because you can go in and zero everything out, get it back to normal if you need it to. So that's an important thing that we're kind of talking about here is item mode. This is going to be very much like model mode in Cinema 4D, where you're able to move the object around as a whole. It's a little bit different in Modo because you can have multiple sort of polygon groups or objects inside of each mesh item. So we're moving each item around. Now, if we do have lots of mesh items inside, or lots of polygons rather, inside of a mesh item, you can go in and move these around by going into a component mode. So very similar to like the point mode and edge mode and polygon mode in Cinema 4D, you can do the same thing here. So you can see the buttons up at the top. So with that item selected, we can go to vertices, edges, or polygons. We can also use the number key, so 1, 2, and 3. Alternatively, if we hit the shift spacebar, that'll take us out of item mode into a component mode, and then we can use spacebar to toggle between all these selections. So we could come to edges, we could select edges, we could go to polygons. There are some polygons, vertices, and so forth. So now if we go to polygons and we double click on the sphere, it's going to select the entire thing. Now let's move the sphere. So I can move the sphere, and we do get values over here in our transform. But when we drop out of that, we don't retain those values at all. So these values here are only the values that the item has been moved or rotated. It doesn't relate to the polygons inside. So keep that in mind. There's a difference between moving all the polygons inside of a mesh item and moving the mesh item itself. Okay, if you move the mesh item, you're going to get those values retained. If you just move the polygons, the mesh item is still going to have those whatever transforms it had on it before. Right, so if I move this sphere, these are not going to change if I just move the sphere based on the polygons. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. To move things around, W is going to be move, E is going to be rotate, and R is going to be scale, whether you're working in item mode or you're working with components. Now, one of the cool things is that it's very easy to move polygons between mesh items. So right now we only have one mesh item. Let's create a new one. It's going to be very easy to do. We can go to add item, and we can come down and add a mesh, or we can just hit the N key, and that creates a new mesh. You can see now these become wireframe. These are inactive meshes or background meshes because we have the other one selected. If we were to go back and select this one, this is now the active mesh. Now they're background or inactive meshes. And right now we have the display set so that the inactive meshes look a little bit different than the active ones. Let's change that display. So I'm going to hit the O key. Okay, and then we can come down to inactive meshes, and let's just make inactive same as active. So now, when I select this one, it's highlighted. When I select this one, the highlight goes away, but we can still see the shading. So now we're in a new mesh item that's empty, right? It's grayed out, just like the one before. Let's move some polygons from this mesh item into the new one. So we're just going to come in and select the polygons, and I'm just going to select this whole sphere by double-clicking on it. And now we're just going to copy and paste it. So if we want to leave the sphere inside of our original mesh item, we'll copy it. If we want to remove it, we'll cut it. Let's remove it. Control X, we'll cut it. We'll select our new mesh item. Control V, we'll paste it in. So just like you're working in a word processor, you can copy or cut and paste polygons from one mesh item to another. Now, when we select this mesh item, we get the sphere, and here we just get the cube. So it doesn't have to be complete polygon shells. It can be just a few polygons if you wanted to do just one side and move that into its own mesh item. It's the same thing. All you have to do is select the polygons and cut and paste them into a new mesh item. Let's, inside of this cube, let's add a new object here, and we'll add this cone. Let's come in, and I'm going to take the polygons here and kind of move them off to the side. Okay. And so if we were to go in now and sort of rotate this, you can see it's rotating around the center of the cone because the cone came in at the origin. Okay. Now in Modo, we've got centers and we've got pivots, and we can move the pivots. The pivots are kind of an offset from the center. So if we wanted to change where this object is rotating from, for instance, maybe we want it to rotate from somewhere over by the cube, let's go to move, and let's just choose pivot. And you can see I'm moving the pivot without affecting the object. Okay, let's drop that. Let's go back to rotate, and now you can see I'm rotating around that new pivot point. Now this is a very simple way of kind of moving the pivot. In Modo, you actually have a wide range of action centers that you can use to modify your objects based on different pivot points and different orientations of the axis in a very quick and flexible way, and we'll take a look at that in a later lesson. But that's how you can kind of move the pivot around to where you want it and be able to rotate it from a particular spot. And again, that's an offset from the center of your object, which in this case was at the origin. Now let's talk a little bit about subdivisions. So subdivisions are how we can go in and see the smooth subdivided version of our model. In Cinema 4D, you would add a subdivision surface, you drop it, your object underneath it inside of your object manager, and then you set the subdivisions that you wanted to see, and you could turn the visibility of that on and off. Here in Modo, let's create a new mesh item. I'm going to turn these off really quickly, and I'm just going to create a simple cube here. And so what I want to do is just hit the tab key, and that will show us a subdivided version of our mesh. We can also, with that mesh item selected, we can come over here into the properties under surface, and we can see the subdivision level. So you can also see, the subdivision level 2 on the view and 2 in the render. And then there's also 2 different kinds of subdivisions. So there's the normal subdivisions, and then there's the Catmull-Clark subdivisions. Tab, again, will toggle back and forth. If you want to use the Catmull-Clark subdivisions, it's going to be Shift-Tab. Now, the advantage of using those is that you can use those for multi-resolution sculpting. So if you're going to be doing some sculpting in kind of like a ZBrush kind of a method, where you've got multiple levels, like Cinema 4D, you've got, depending on what version you've got subdivision levels there as well. You can go in and use the Catmull-Clark subdivision to do that. If you're using regular subdivision, you can't, but it's still good for kind of visualizing what this is going to look like smooth. So you can come in here and change the subdivision level, and there we go. So I was in Catmull-Clark. So you can see there, that's a little bit rougher. You increase the smoothness, and you can go in and use all of your polygon modeling tools while this is subdivided. Keep in mind that if you hit tab while you've just got one polygon or a couple of polygons selected, it is going to toggle just that polygon. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything selected when you do it. Again, that's the tab key or shift tab to use the Catmull-Clark if you're going to be using a multi-resolution sculpting workflow, kind of like the sculpt tag in Cinema 4D. So next, we'll take a look at how the tool pipe works. So we've kind of got a little bit of a taste of it by dropping the tool using the space bar. But we'll talk about the tool pipe and how we can start to combine things together. We'll start to talk about action centers and fall-offs and how we can create our own tools in a very custom workflow. So let's talk about that next.